Well, this series is certainly gathering momentum. Welcome back to Abandoned from the Air. Episode 4, and it's a biggie. When you think of abandoned areas, this is the area, including the town of Prypiat, you think of. And it's been 34 years. Early in the morning of April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station in the Ukraine exploded. A sudden surge of power during a reactor systems test blew up. The accident and fire that followed released massive amounts of radioactive material into the environment. Emergency crews responded to the accident, fighting fires on the roof of the turbine hall. Arrival of firefighters from Prypiat, Grigory Kemel, the driver of one of the fire engines, later described what happened. He said, "We arrived there at 10 or 15 minutes to 2 in the morning. We saw graphite scattered about. Misha asked, 'Is that graphite?' I kicked it away. One of the fighters on the other truck picked it up. 'It's hot,' he said. The pieces of graphite were different sizes, some big, some small, enough to pick them up. We didn't know much about radiation. Even those who worked there had no idea. There was no water left in the trucks. Misha filled a cistern and we aimed the water at the top. Then those boys who died went up to the roof. Vishik, Kolya and others. And Volodya. They went up to the ladder and I never saw them again." By 6:35 on the morning of the accident, 37 fire brigades with a total of 186 firefighters have by now been called in. All fires are out with the exception of the fire contained inside Reactor 4. Emergency crews used helicopters to pour sand and boron on the reactor debris. The sand was to stop the fire and additional releases of radioactive material. The boron was to prevent additional nuclear reactions. It wasn't until midnight on Sunday the 27th of April that buses began to arrive in Prypiat. They waited for a command to evacuate the city. The evacuation finally begins at 2 p.m. Residents were given 2 hours notice to gather belongings. The evacuation of Prypiat's 43,000 residents took 3.5 hours and 1,200 buses. Residents were asked to carry with them only what was required for 2 or 3 days. A few weeks after the accident, the crews completely covered the damaged unit in a temporary concrete structure called the sarcophagus to limit further release of radioactive material. The Soviet government also cut down and buried about a square mile of pine forest near the plant to reduce radioactive contamination at and near the site. Chernobyl's 3 other reactors were subsequently restarted, but all eventually shut down for good, with the last reactor closing in 1999. The Soviet and later on Russian government evacuated about 115,000 people from the most heavily contaminated areas in 1986 and another 220,000 people in subsequent years. Chernobyl cleanup activities eventually required about 600,000 workers, although only a small fraction of these workers were exposed to elevated levels of radiation. Government agencies continued to monitor cleanup and recovery workers' health. In 2016, the new safe confinement was repositioned over the sarcophagus, and finishing works were completed in 2018. This new structure is designed to last at least 100 years. Microsoft's rendering capabilities with Bing Maps means it's not entirely visible in the game. Thanks very much for joining me on this episode. If you have any suggestions for future abandoned episodes, drop them in the chat below. See you next time.